Well, Chicago, we have a new leader. Brandon Johnson was officially sworn in as the 57th mayor of Chicago just days ago. And while he may be the biggest change for Chicago, he certainly isn't the only change, as Monday's inauguration saw a record number of new alderpeople sworn into office. So we may have a new mayor and a new council. Now what? I'm Tracy Baim, sitting in for my friend Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. We'll talk about the mayor and more right after this short break.
This week, my guest will guide us through this new world of crypto finance and help us decide whether it's worth our while to invest in.
Think of this the exact same way that you would think of a traditional investment. You want to go in, you want to research, you want to scrutinize.
It's easier just to do a pro and a con list and see what you can lose versus what you can't lose.
In the Money airs on Thursday at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CAN-TV Plus app.
In this week's one-on-one segment, I'm joined by a servant leader who is deeply committed to the creation of systems that allow people and teams to do their work, specifically young people. Priya Linson, Executive Director of One Goal Chicago, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you. The One Goal Chicago organization is celebrating its 15th anniversary this year. You're 10 years at the organization. For our viewers who may not be aware, can you tell us a little bit about the mission and purpose of One Goal Chicago?
Yeah, absolutely. One Goal is an organization that's focused on transforming the way that young people experience advising and support as they make this big transition between high school and adulthood. A lot of times high school is sort of a pit stop. It's something that kids try to get through. And what we want to make sure is that young people get really intentional support and advising to sort of craft their life. Nobody asks kids anymore, what do you want to do when you grow up, when they're in high school? And it's really a centerpiece of our program, is making sure that we're centering young people's aspirations and their voices, and that we're actually helping them design pathways to degree attainment so that they can achieve their greatest aspirations.
And it's through a classroom-based model. So what does that really mean?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's really unique because our program actually operates during the school day as a credit-bearing class that's taught by an experienced teacher. And so these young people actually have One Goal as a class on their schedule every single day of junior year and every single day of senior year. And then that same teacher moves into a remote support and coach role in that really critical first year post-high school. That year where you're sort of trying to figure out what's happening with your life. That's the time that young people need support the most. So that you're putting down roots in your college or your university, or you're figuring out what's next. And so the 3-year span of the program that goes from high school into post-secondary, and the same teacher being that key support and advisor is a really critical component of our program.
So who are the people doing this? They're planted in there by the nonprofit organization?
No, they're actually district teachers. So we have a really unique partnership with the districts in which we operate, where students actually participate as it's a credit-bearing class, and teachers drop a period of whatever class they typically teach. So we have math teachers, we have English teachers, we have science teachers, PE teachers that all show up and are part of this program in their schools, and making sure that this work is embedded into the school day. We believe that post-secondary advising is as critical to the school day as math or science or any other core class. And it's so different than the average student. On average, students only receive 38 minutes of post-secondary advising through all 4 years of college. And these are like little bite-sized moments of advising. So it's really different than the intentional daily support and advising that our young people get in the One Goal classes.
Wow. So the cohorts have an average of a 2.8 GPA. 95% of the fellows identify as people of color, and 93% are eligible for free or reduced lunch. Why is it so important to reach and support this group of students?
It's actually a really critical part of our program. Typically, you'll see students that are higher performing students academically get a lot of support, not just from their schools, but from other nonprofit organizations and even from universities themselves. The ability for us to ensure that young people are getting access to a post-secondary degree for students that are in that middle performing band is so, so critical. So we specifically target students across Chicago that are in that 2.0 to 3.0 GPA band. These are students who have all the potential and all the aspirations as their higher performing and their higher income peers and don't have the support. If you're getting a snippet of advising with an 8-minute session here or a 6-minute session there from an advisor or a counselor, you're just not developing the relationships to examine your life and to examine your strengths and to think about what's next.
Mm-hmm. So can you give me an example of a school in Chicago where you've been and seen some of this program in action?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we are operating in over 40 schools across Chicago, and we have been doing this work across CPS and other Chicago schools for over 15 years. And so it's a really exciting milestone for us to be celebrating 15 years of impact, and we've served over 10,000 students just in Chicago during that time. So one school that I can think of in particular is Crane Medical Academy. It's a school where we've operated for a long time, and it's a unique example because we've actually been able to pivot to serving their entire junior and entire senior year class. Mm-hmm. So instead of just serving one class of students, we're serving the entire student body in the junior and senior year, and that's because the principals have historically just been really committed to post-secondary support.
And you started about 10 years ago when One Goal Chicago started also branching out, and there are One Goals in how many other cities?
We're operating now in 5 other cities, and we're starting to do work across Illinois as well outside of Chicago. So it's an exciting moment.
What brought you to this organization? What's your own personal journey related to education?
You know, I started as a New York City public school teacher, and I taught in the South Bronx, and we just didn't have the kind of support for our young people. I was a brand new teacher. It was a small school, a new school, and we were a sort of young and scrappy team. And we just didn't have the resources to invest in our students as they started to get closer to graduation day. I spent a couple of years in Pittsburgh where I was a school leader, and then I moved into the nonprofit space where I've led program and now development for a couple of organizations. And throughout my time in education, I had just not seen any public school system or any program that was truly investing in young people to make this transition between the K-12 system and what comes next. We just have this sort of divide that's a black hole. And so coming to One Goal was in part because I was inspired by the mission and had seen something very different in my years as a teacher and a principal. But I stay because it's a great organization that's making significant impact in our city.
And it started in Chicago. The national headquarters is in Chicago.
That's exactly right.
And we have a teacher for a mayor now.
That's true.
What are your thoughts about that being something that might help prioritize education?
I think it's really exciting that we have education as a central issue, and of course we hope that conversation continues. I think that there are so many ways that you can talk about education, and one of the things that I care deeply about is our ability to see students all the way through. In many cases, we think about early education as very siloed from the K-12 space or the PK-12 space that is very siloed from the post-secondary space. We need to make all of these transitions stronger for young people and for families.
Wow, it's terrific. The timing's great, talking about education with a teacher for a mayor. Thank you so much, Priya, for coming. Check out One Goal Chicago online for all the great work they do.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be right back with this week's Roundtable. Stay with us.
The right to vote is a cornerstone of American democracy. But in the recent Chicago election runoff, only 35% of Chicagoans voted. This week on Change Agents, we will meet an organization and its incredible leaders who are committed to empowering the next generation of Chicagoans to become more civically minded. Join us this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, stream us live on cantv.org, or download the CAN-TV Plus app.
Brandon Johnson has been sworn in as the 57th mayor of Chicago, alongside a gaggle of new alderpeople in the new city council. So what did you think of his inauguration speech? Were we able to glean any insight into what this administration's priorities are, how Mayor Johnson will govern, or whether the mayor and the city council will be able to play nice together in the political sandbox over the next 4 years? Joining the roundtable this week to help us break it all down are Jacoby Cochran, host of CityCast Chicago, Tonia Hill, a reporter with The Tribe, and Deborah Douglas, Director, Midwest Solutions Journalism Hub, Medill School of Journalism, Media, Integrated Marketing, Communications at Northwestern University. Welcome, friends. Let's get into it. Let's start with Deborah. If you can give a grade of what you thought of Monday's inauguration and why.
I will say an A-. Nobody gets an A grade in my class.
Come on.
You gotta work really hard for it.
That was my thought too.
And you have to accomplish some things first. But I'll say that the mayor's speech really provided a sense of belonging and a sense of place, not only for the community that he comes from Austin, but for all of Chicago, from centering the original people, indigenous people, to Great Migration descendants and immigrants and people who built the labor movement. I really felt like he held up a mirror so that you could see yourself in the story that he is about to write for Chicago.
Antonia?
I think you summed that up really well. I also feel like it was, for me, I would say A- too, but just on the fact that it was just unapologetically Black. Starting off, having an African dance come in. I'm a church kid, so hearing Richard Smallwood's Anthem of Praise to bring us in, that was something we always heard for all our Easter Resurrection Sunday productions coming in. And also the Walt Whitman and the Soul Children of Chicago singing the Black National Anthem with their fists raised. So it felt, it wavered, as a team we talked about it, but it wavered between feeling like a church service. Of course, Karen Clark Sheard, legend, and then also feeling like a graduation at the same time.
Yeah, I loved hearing Avery Young as well. And Jacoby?
Yeah, it was great to see the new poet laureate out there. I'm going to go and I think we're going to round this out with A-minuses all around from the panel today. And one of the things that I thought Tonia hit right on the head is being unapologetically Black. And one of the things you see in this city is oftentimes politicians will bring out a footworking team or bring out the bucket boys, bring out something that next to them doesn't always feel authentic. It feels like they're trying to check off as many boxes as possible. But at least what I took away personally from watching that inauguration ceremony is these are the cultural institutions that matter to Brandon Johnson. These are the signifiers of Chicago that he wants the rest of the world to see versus, how do we get the most sort of cliche Sears Tower reference for the lay Chicagoan.
Right. I like to just co-sign on authenticity because I was reading it, I was watching and I was clocking it for centering his true authentic self, but also delivering a message where people who don't come from the Black church tradition or from the West Side or from the Black community to see if they felt like they could still find themselves in this story. And we talked about code switching a little bit earlier today. I won't say he necessarily code switched in those moments, but he stood in the power of who he has always been and who he will always be. And for that, there was a truth and transparency in that felt welcoming.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the people watching at home, and all of you mentioned this kind of church-like feeling. So it felt very intentional. Like even the phrase soul of Chicago, there's so many meanings of that word soul that he could have been going for. Was that your impression too, that there was this real intent to?
I think so. I think like Deborah said, just like being authentic and also like making it so other people can find connection to it. There are a lot of references and things he said, like talking about, like we were saying earlier, like play cousins, people who in the audience who don't know what play cousins are, like maybe they left there wondering like, okay, what does he mean by a play cousin, So I think it was a way to, even his speech was all about unity and combining or all people like finding common ground to address like our challenges in the city.
Yeah, even though he's had this approach of team of rivals, right, to He's appointed people that are from all these places. The openness to hearing that isn't always there, right? And so during the ceremony, a representative from the American Indian Center delivered remarks during which some police district counselors turned their backs, and a demonstrator began yelling. How did that play with viewers in terms of your point of view? We'll start with you, Jacoby.
Another reason for giving him an A-, there were a few stumbles along the way. One being, I thought trying to make the connection between the grief that Adam Toledo's parents are experiencing and the grief that the parents of Ariana Preston, the police officer killed last week or a few weeks ago, I thought was a misstep. I think you can speak to both communities, but in that moment, he's trying to sow this unity between sort of the organizing community that wants to push back against police violence, but also show that he is here for beat cops and for officers. And I think you can make that point in separate parts of the speech. And then in this particular remark, we saw from the Chi Nations Youth Council that they have beef with the American Indian Center here in Chicago for what they argue is a history of conservatism. Back in 2020, they put up an All Life Matters mural outside of their facility. And their argument was that, it is about a connection to not just human life, but plant life and animal life, the life of our planet. And yet in that moment, the council is saying, but you see the cultural struggle we're in right now. And so to even try and co-opt this language at a time in which it is so central to the movement for Black liberation is, is not only a misstep in that regard, but it's sort of anti to what they hope is an American Indian Center that works to bring Chicagoans together, that doesn't sort of stratify. And in that moment, it's very clear that, maybe Brandon Johnson didn't do his research in that regard, or wanted to still gain the stewardship from what is still an influential organization in our city. And those type of concessions and walking the fine line we'll see over the next 4 years is how well can you do that? Because you can't make everybody happy.
Deborah, did you note that part of the speech?
I did note that part of the speech, and I thought Jacoby's assessment was beautifully said. I want to defer to Tonia because I get my news from the tribe, and they cover this.
That's where I got the breakdown as well.
Right. Yeah, as we were preparing for the inauguration, a member of the Police District Council did come over to the press area and kind of just tell us what was going on, that they were going to do that. And then as the ceremony was going on, I did see one of the representatives in the stand, so they weren't too far away from me. I don't think it. There was a little bit of a disruption with it, which of course is intentional. But some of the things that I couldn't hear all of what they were saying, but I think, like Jacoby said, did some research happen, before that moment. So maybe we could have avoided that situation. But I don't know that people walked away from that in the audience thinking maybe I should research further and figure out why this happened. I think people were just why is this happening, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why is this interrupting the flow of it? So it was I heard some disappointed sighs or just trying to understand what was going on.
Unless they read the tribe. And so let me bow down to the tribe right now, because I've been in journalism in Chicago 39 years. I covered Harold Washington. I've covered every mayor since. And the work that the tribe did from a journalism perspective in this mayor's race, the general election and then the runoff, was incredible. It shouldn't only be on the tribe, but it was on the tribe this time. And can you talk a little bit about the role of journalism? It's kind of you balance this thing of knowing what's right for a city when you're a journalist. You have all the different eyes and the catbird seat of what's going on. At the same time, you want to speak truth to that, even the allies, right? So talk a little bit about your coverage during that.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, Tribe founder and editor-in-chief Tiffany Walton, who that is the whole reason why all of this occurred. Her vision is why we were able to attack stories the way we were. But we did some really intentional planning. We knew that this was a big election and that we had the opportunity to reshape some narratives, and that is our mission. But something else that's a part of our mission is, Black people are at the center of our stories, and so is Black liberation in progress. So we feel like it's our responsibility as journalists to call out people, institutions that are working against Black progress and Black liberation. So just speaking of the coverage from the election, it was, looking at the the misinformation around the Chicago Teachers Union, like all the negativity going around with that, like not understanding what the clear goals are or how unions work. But also like in the larger framework, I just feel like this traces back to 2020. So, you know, you have George Floyd being killed by a police officer. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. People are suffering from mass unemployment and not having housing. All these things are like tied together. And so we have this next year where all these politicians are like co-opting this language from that movement, and then they're elected, and then they're like, oh, well, you know, never mind. So I feel like everything that people, organizers, and all these like institutions that were fighting on behalf of Black liberation for everyday people, I feel like this election was important because we had an opportunity to go further. And I feel like had Paul Vallis been elected, we would have kind of gone backwards.
Right.
I would just like to just follow up with that and just to say that there is power in having a really defined focus on operating from a Black liberatory lens. And so we always talk about objectivity in journalism, and so the tribe puts an anchor in the ground on that as their point of entry to their stories. And so the not so secret of that is really how they go about framing the communities that they cover. The teacher part of me loves to talk about framing because what the tribe does so well from a solutions journalism lens, which is what I'm here to evangelize, is that they asset frame the communities that they cover, meaning that they approach the communities and define them by who they purpose themselves to be each day when they get up to start a day anew. They don't define themselves by the one bad thing that happened to them that may have happened to them over and over again. Maybe it's not having housing, maybe it's not having a job, maybe it's being caught up in the criminal legal system. There's no justice in it, in the criminal legal system. And so instead of defining people by all those things over and over again until it becomes the truth of a people, they imagine that people have a 360-degree view of their lives and they want to be better, and the point of entry to their coverage presumes all of that. And I would like to applaud you for that.
Thank you for that. You summed that up like so beautifully. Like literally, that was just our goal. We knew there was a lot of like opportunity to dispel narratives, especially around violence, around crime, and even just looking at the results, like people that experience crime at higher levels than any other communities, it was Black people that voted overwhelmingly for Brandon Johnson. So that just shows we're, as a city, we're moving to want to consider holistic approaches to violence.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I come at it from the gay press angle, and it's like, okay, the framing is you start with Black is good, you start with gay is good, and that somehow gets to be framed as advocacy, right? And so I just so appreciated that. With CityCast, like what was your approach to covering the politics of this?
That was a very good question. Continue hats off to Tonia Hill and the tribe. I've actually walked through communities like Bronzeville with Tonia and talked about like the history of the 1st Congressional District all the way back to Oscar Stanton DePriest. And so I know the type of effort that she puts into her coverage in the tribe in general. And we wanted to emulate that in a way. We wanted to ask questions that provided nuance, that didn't just say, okay, what is Paul Vallis's plan for this? What is Brandon Johnson's plan for this? We sat down with Brandon Johnson at Principal Barber in North Lawndale, and we pushed him on some of his points. We tried to see if we could move him away from some of his talking points. And what I gleaned in that moment is that this is a person who is willing to be opened up to conversation. This is a person who is willing to do their best to, quote unquote, hear both sides. I don't think there's always a sort of both sides to an argument. I think sometimes things are just wrong.
Sometimes it's trash.
Exactly. Yes. And so our goal is to, one, come in as people who care about the city of Chicago. Two, because we're a podcast, people assume we're just like sitting around talking and not like digging deep and doing the research on these issues. And then third, our goal is to sort of make sure the conversation is happening in a way that is both accessible for people who this isn't their daily life following the news, but also when you listen to me speak about these issues, it sounds like someone who is impacted. It sounds like someone who isn't trying to search for objectivity just for the sake of it. And that's one of the things we've really appreciated, and hope is moving forward in this administration that Brandon Johnson continues to reach out to those alternative media sites, because the tribe, CityCast, the Hood Wazee, Ergo Radio, Healthy Hood, all of these local organizations, local movement media institutions, they are tapped into a part of Chicago that maybe not everyone is tapped into. I think back to 2019 after Mayor Lightfoot won, there was so much focus on, look how progressive this is, look how monumental this is, but there were people in the organizing community who felt gaslit the entire time.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure when we have these conversations, we're not ignoring that perspective and just focusing on sort of headline polling, but getting down to the nitty gritty with Chicagoans.
Yeah, this journalism is so exciting. So we've got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about the first 100 days or other kinds of priorities you see for this administration.
Sure. So Mayor Johnson said yesterday he talked about Bring Chicago Home, so addressing people that are experiencing homelessness. He also talks about boosting youth employment. We saw that with one of the executive orders that he put into place yesterday, and then also addressing treatment, not trauma. That's something he also mentioned. So I think all of those are really important, and I'm really interested to see if the new city council if he can galvanize, those people that endorsed him to kind of push the needle to address those things in the first 100 days.
Excellent. Deborah?
Well, we know that youth employment is one of the key answers to diverting youth into more positive purposes and giving them a sense of purpose, and it's the beginning of the answer to the public safety challenges that we're facing in the city. So I'm hoping that he can realize the investments that he wants to make in increasing the number of youth who can be hired over the summer, because every summer that's always the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Jacoby?
Me, I'm interested to see what his plan is for the growing number of asylum seekers making their way to Chicago, largely of the 8,000, many of them Venezuelan migrants. And I think Brandon Johnson has to do two things. One, he has to show the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois that he has a clear plan and a clear team to address their needs. But also there is work to be done to make sure that Chicagoans across the city feel like they're also invested in, feel like their neighborhoods aren't being used to sort of quickly deal with the crisis, but eventually when the cameras turn off, both the residents of those neighborhoods and the asylum seekers are sort of left resourceless. And so I think he has to do a dual job to make sure people are protected as they arrive to the city, but also Chicagoans feel like they're being entered into the process in a way that doesn't demonize them.
Well, the great thing is we've got great journalists watching it. Our sincere thanks to our roundtable today. We never have enough time. We could do this for a whole week. I think we'd still not have it. So Jacoby, Tonia, and Deborah, we look forward to having you back again at the table in the future. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
Hi, I'm Ryan G. I'm the host of Tweenish.
Okay, you're going to have to show me this wall here.
It's a really nice, fun dance move.
It's a fun dance?
Yeah, it just goes like,
am I doing that right? We gotta bring it all around.
Tune in to my show every single week on CanTV 19. I'm personally excited. Are you?
The inauguration of a new mayor marks a new beginning in our city. The thing about beginnings is that you never quite know how things will turn out. While each of us might have a gut feeling based on past experience living in the second city, no one has a crystal ball. The next 100 days and the next 4 years are a wait and see. What the mayor does in the dash moments will likely tell you the tale. In the meantime, we wait and see and wish Mayor Johnson the absolute best, because he goes, so goes Chicago. Thanks again to the amazing Andy Zopp for inviting me to guest host in her stead. She returns next week for an all-new Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Until then, be well, Chicago.